Hello everyone, and welcome to the 143rd episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Syndrome from The Incredibles, a case of super fandom gone super wrong. Syndrome is every superhero's worst nightmare, the monster in the shadows who manages to one-up these godlike beings at nearly every turn. In this video, we're going to take a look at how one happy-go-lucky kid can transform into a diabolical villain with just a small push in the wrong direction. A deconstruction of the story of one man that's just as tragic as it is despicable. I'm sure you can see it below this video, but it's been a while since I've mentioned my beautiful merchandise. So if you're looking for some truly vile threads, make sure you click any of the images you see down below or the link in the description. Now without further ado, let's begin. In the world of Buddy Pine, where superheroes walk amongst mortal men, there's plenty for a child to idolize that they wouldn't have already had these superhuman figures remain tucked away in their comic books. On the way to school, you might spy Gazer Beam launching waves of psychic energy at a mad scientist. The skies above a sunny day at the park could transform into a swirling maelstrom as Thunderhead uses his barometric prowess to stop a mad tyrant from dominating the world. Any one of these super beings might pique your interest, but for little Buddy Pine, it was Mr. Incredible, the man of infinite strength, taking his fist to any immovable object as the only unstoppable force that could send it flying. However, Mr. Incredible wasn't just giving you the occasional glimpse at his exploits. He was everywhere. Merchandise, posters, newsreels. Mr. Incredible was the superhero of superheroes, and he was everything to Buddy Pine. Buddy, of course, would have given anything to be like Mr. Incredible, but on the surface, that appeared to have been impossible, as Buddy wasn't super like his idol. So, Buddy endeavored to do the best he could despite his limitations. He signed himself up to be Mr. Incredible's sidekick, Incrediboy, qualifications, a pair of rocket boots, a position in the Mr. Incredible fan club, and a very noble claim to #1 fan. Unfortunately for Buddy, Mr. Incredible refused his help. And rightfully so, as involving a young child like Buddy Pine in crime fighting would have not only been quite the hindrance, but a danger to both Buddy and Mr. Incredible's lives, especially since Buddy seemed to have no superpowers of his own. After Buddy predictably caused quite the debacle by involving himself in a crime scene, Mr. Incredible ensured Buddy was taught a lesson by putting him in the back of a police car, scolding him, chastising him, and sending him home to his mother afterwards so she might learn what he's done. Buddy was understandably crushed, and from this bout of severe disappointment would form a lifelong hatred of all things super, the special beings that he had once wanted more than anything to be like, but now vilified as elitist scum who only looked down on the people they supposedly protected and served. Now the most tragic thing about this whole situation is what caused Buddy's hatred to form in the first place, that being Mr. Incredible's reaction to his overzealous desire to be his sidekick. When you're young and impressionable, anything and everything can make an impression on you, and if one of those things happen to be negative, they tend to make the biggest impression of all. We've often discussed on this channel how the elements of one's childhood play a heavy hand in forming who we are, and in the case of Buddy Pine, we're given one such defining moment that forever altered his life and the lives of many others, and the only person there is to blame for it is the magnificent Mr. Incredible himself. As I said, Mr. Incredible was right in refusing to take on the ordinary-seeming Buddy as a sidekick for many reasons, but he handled it in one of the worst ways he could. Instead of leveling with a child who saw him as a god on earth, explaining to him the dangers of his work, and educating him in a positive manner, he brushed him off and treated him as an annoyance. Now, did Bob know that this was going to turn Buddy into an egomaniacal murderer? Of course not. He's to blame for behaving the way he did, not for what happened after the fact, as how could he have possibly known? But therein lies the problem. No one knows what the consequences of our actions will be when we treat someone in a negative way. Maybe if you yell at a child, they'll become meek and anxious. Maybe they'll mold their own identity off your behavior and develop into an angry person who reflects what they learned from their caregivers back onto others. Or maybe they'll remember your abuses as a minor but painful footnote in their personal history, and it won't affect them at all. No matter what happens though, the point is that if you treat someone poorly, the end result of that treatment is much more likely to be poor more than it is to be positive. We all get frustrated, and sometimes it's really difficult to rein that frustration in. And yes, kids can be quite annoying, but if you try your best to make expressing your frustration the exception rather than the rule, you'll find that you, as well as the person you're caring for, will be better off for it in the end. Unfortunately, When it comes to adoring young fans, Mr. Incredible seemed to have made expressing his frustrations in a negative way the rule rather than the exception, at least in this one instance that we're given. When he finds Buddy sitting in his passenger seat ready to sign up to become his ward, he first complains about how he's been nice. He stood for photos and signed every scrap of paper that's been pushed at him. And yes, just like kids can be, being a public figure can be quite annoying. So his initial frustrations at having an energetic kid in his passenger seat are understandable. However, instead of letting Buddy down gently and explaining the dangers of his job, he chooses to launch him from his car out onto the grass. So, without any sort of good explanation as to why he shouldn't, Buddy continues to follow his idol, making a rather remarkable entrance with a pair of rocket boots. And here, he's once again rebuffed when Bob tells him to go home and that he works alone. What ensues is chaos that nearly claims multiple lives, and then a reprimand that only seeks to punish once again, rather than educate. And all of this started with one bad decision. A bad decision that led to a horrible situation, that then ends with yet another bad decision. Not to mention that he completely ignores that this boy who couldn't be older than 10 years old managed to invent a pair of rocket boots, an indicator that Buddy is in fact a super due to his genius-level intellect. And if you, as a well-established super, leave a bad impression on one of your own, well, it isn't too surprising when they follow the opposite fork in the path towards superhood. Again, it's understandable that Bob was frustrated throughout this ordeal, but if he had taken just a moment to think about how impactful the words and actions of his incredible self would be on a child, everything after that moment could have been prevented. He realizes this once he encounters Buddy again 15 years later, but that realization comes 15 years too late. And Buddy is now far and away from being the spunky would-be do-gooder that he was in his youth. Arrogant, condescending, and merciless, Buddy in some ways is still that same plucky kid that he was, but with a whole lot more malice now fueling everything he does. His humor is laced with a brutal tint, and his motives are centered entirely on what he wants, no matter what it might cost anyone else that gets in his way. And the way he still retains many of his naive childlike qualities, while amplifying them with sadism and cruelty, only adds to the terror that is his persona. Syndrome is who he is now, and everything good that Buddy could have been is mirrored by just how horrid he is now. Buddy's ingenuity could have easily been turned towards fighting evil or improving society in general. Revolutionary medicine, robotics, transportation, the possibilities were endless, and the inventions of Buddy Pine could have been some of the most important and impactful innovations in the history of the human race. Well, what he ended up creating was impactful alright, but not in a way that benefited anyone else except Buddy. Luxury living on his own private island, dozens of minions to do his bidding, and a sultry secretary as his lover. Syndrome had it made. But all of this was gained through the invention and sale of weaponry to the highest bidder, the ultimate technology that could give president and despot alike that leading edge they needed in the race to see who could destroy the other first. And who knows how many lives were ended with the weapons that Buddy sold to malefactors. Perhaps if his machinations had ended there, Syndrome might have lived out the rest of his days in devilish style, a heap of misery sown throughout the populace by virtue of his seedy business, and a pile of cash that Scrooge McDuck would salivate over. But for a man who once wished to enter the annals of fame and recognition alongside Mr. Incredible, that would have never been enough. Syndrome's true motive, the murder of nearly every super so he might manufacture a crisis, save the day, and become the greatest hero who ever lived, is about as sinister and self-centered as you can get. And nearly every known superhero lost their lives, so he could simultaneously ascend higher than they could have ever reached, and eliminate all those who dared to claim that they were worth more than the little man. I suppose to his credit, when he was done playing his games and eating up all the glory the world had to offer, he did plan to give his inventions to the masses, so everyone might taste the divinity that is superdom. But who knows how many emerging supers would have lost their lives, or been brainwashed to serve as minions, during the reign of Syndrome the Magnificent and Terrible. As when you consider he was more than willing to murder the entire Parr family and kidnap Jack to train him to be his future sidekick, the possibilities for ever-increasing evil to be unleashed by this maniac were limitless. But his hubris and his desire for revenge would spell the end for poor Buddy Pine, and a new era of superpowers for all, lorded over by the one true savior of the world, was over before it had even entered its infancy. A sad tale of a once wide-eyed young man that was corrupted into the very thing he had once sought to fight alongside his hero. And at his explosive end, what is there to say about Syndrome? He was a child who started off as innocent as any other, a boy who wanted nothing more than to save the world as Incrediboy, the boy genius aiding Mr. Incredible in doing the impossible. Sadly, with one monumentally crushing defeat imposed upon him by his well-intentioned idol, Buddy Pine was irrevocably transformed into Syndrome, a man whose disappointment blossomed into vindictive hatred that spurred him towards megalomania and barbarity. There is no excuse for what Buddy became, and his solidification as a man who brought more harm than health to the world is something that not many would be willing to forgive, and rightfully so. But we'd all do well to remember that evil doesn't often come from nowhere. It festers in the hearts of men and women who have felt its cold embrace, squeezing the essence of what it means to be human from their very souls. The negligence and abuse of those that came before them that can transform the next Einstein into a supervillain of monstrous proportions. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Syndrome? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, to my patrons, and to anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.